We're continuing YouTube week here on the Rubin Report, and my guest today is a scientist who works in chemistry and biochemistry, as well as taking down social justice warriors in his spare time. Phil Mason, aka Thunderfoot, welcome to the Rubin Report.
Thanks for having me on.
So what should I call you here? Are we going with Phil? Should we go with Thunderfoot? Should we go with Thunder? Mr. Foot? What are you feeling?
Well, whatever feels more comfortable with you. I'm happy with it all. So.
All right. Well, I was just telling you before we started that I'm looking forward to chatting with you, because when I kind of woke up to all of this regressive left nonsense and social justice BS and all that stuff, you were one of the first people that everybody was tagging on Twitter say, talk to this guy, talk to this guy. So we're overdue, I think.
Yeah, I reckon so. It's been a long time coming.
It certainly has. Okay, so for people that have no idea who you are or what you do, you're a scientist by day. That's the first part here. So can you just tell me a little bit about your history?
Well, I was working at Cornell for about 10 years. And while there, I've been fairly productive during the day. So productive in the end that I actually had rather a lot of spare time. So I started making videos on YouTube, because at the time, creationists, this was right in the infancy of YouTube, and creationists basically, they had a free run, and they were peddling some of the most outrageous bullshit ever. And what really got me into this is I had colleagues that were going into government accountability office, and I showed one of these videos about this creationist spouting the most obvious bullshit, and I asked them, what's wrong with this? And of course, they didn't have even this. They suspected it was bullshit, and that's where I started making these videos, sort of explaining why it was bullshit. Yeah. And in the early days, I was doing it just because there was a need for it, and there still is. And the problem is that way back then, and even now, there is no incentive for real scientists to take time away to actually counter a lot of this pseudoscience that's out there. So that's how I got into it. Yeah. And then sometime later, I rubbed up against the social justice warriors. But maybe we can get into that.
Yeah, we're going to get into that. All right, but let's back up to a little bit of your science background. What got you into science, and what kind of work do you actually do?
So I actually really cover a lot of bases. So by training, I'm a chemist, but I've done a lot of work in physics and biochemistry. I really don't fit well into boxes when you're trying to just categorize me like that.
Sure.
And also quite like the astronomy. So it really does cover a lot of bases there.
Yeah. So when you saw these creationists on YouTube in the infancy of YouTube, how long did it take before you said, I have to do something about this? Because going from the lab to going to public, that's quite a jump you have there.
And initially it was relatively easy to stay anonymous on YouTube. I never really showed my face, which is one of the reasons that really grinds my gears when people say that I've got white privilege or something, because I almost never appear on camera, right? All of the people who follow me never knew what I looked like till about 5 years in.
Yeah. So they were just assuming you had white privilege at the time?
I don't know, but things like that, or that I didn't actually work to get where I am now, which, things like that are just crazy.
Yeah. What made you take the jump from doing most of this, not that you were doing it anonymously, but without your face, to the point of saying, okay, I have to put my face to this? Because we've been talking about this a lot, sort of the balance between there's a need for some anonymity online, especially if you lived in a closed society. And I can understand some people that do it from Western societies, but I also have my frustrations with some of them. What sort of made that light go off for you?
Well, at one point, of course, I got doxxed, and after that, you can't put the genie back in, and it's inevitable. There's only so long you can go online before someone just drops something, either accidentally or intentionally. And I still wear it as a badge of honor. I forget, it was in the millions of views point before someone actually, before it became public knowledge who I was, which I thought was doing okay. But me, I'm a big proponent of the concept is valid no matter where it comes from. And this is why I do quite a lot of my stuff off camera, because what I look like and all that sort of thing is a point of irrelevant. In fact, in science, it almost works against you. You get the clean-cut guy with the sharp suit and all that sort of thing. In science, you immediately think salesman, bullshit salesman. And so, with a lot of times, if people are groomed like that, there's a distrust in science of them.
So is this why we should trust scientists that kind of have long hair and maybe are half shaven and are a little more disheveled? Like a mad scientist would be a little more trustworthy to you just by looks?
So for me, yes. But this is where you get scientists and universities especially, they're a very sheltered society. And within the actual scientific department, that's the way it is. That's the bubble there. But of course, in reality, in the wide world,
right,
you want to go on the news and be taken seriously, you've got to look a certain way, right? Looks matter, right? And it's bizarrely enough, took me a long time to learn that was the case. And so you can get people who are really, I spent a lot of time doing science and research. You would have thought that it's bizarre that you can be so naive to think that you can get away with that sort of thing without a certain look online.
Right. So you're saying that, I don't know if you're quite saying this, but Bill Nye, the science guy, he's playing the part of the science guy for a sort of palatable digestion purpose. Yeah.
And I've got no problem with that whatsoever.
Yeah.
I'm very pragmatic like that. In fact, so is he. He's an engineer, right? They care about results.
Right.
If it gets the message across, a win's a win.
A win's a win.
Don't get too picky about the details.
Right. So backing up to the doxing for a second, because I do want to talk about that for a little bit. So that was actually, I didn't realize that was the first time that you were sort of outed publicly. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you had been completely anonymous before that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah. It was a Muslim guy, of course, and he wrote. He was the first guy. He wrote, and there was this Skype log that came out afterwards, where he was actively going after my docs, and if we find out where he works, that'll be the end of him. It was really aggressive stuff, considering. It's true that places like YouTube and just online in general is a bloodbath of free speech. It's not for the meek or the timid, but ultimately it's a flat arena. You can give as if you want to disprove something that's wrong online, you can do it. And if you make a convincing argument, people will generally believe it. And so scoping for someone's job, trying to end their career, that's really nasty stuff. Yeah. Especially when it was absolutely nothing to do with what I was doing online. If I was, proudly using, Cornell's name or whatever it is to promote myself, then fair dues. But I wasn't. I was almost entirely faceless voice. Making arguments online.
So in effect, you were making arguments that this guy didn't like. He basically couldn't or refused to counter the arguments in a logical way, and then instead said, "All right, I'm going to go after his welfare and at some level your personal safety."
And he
doesn't know what risk that.
He he claimed that he wrote. Well, he did. I know he wrote to the university. He wrote to all the local Muslim groups, and it's like at that point, sending them my videos with my name attached, and it's like, come on, that's this is that's pretty cheap stuff.
In a way, he was probably proving your point about Islam, right?
Very much so. Yeah. In fact, later on, he went through a few later spasms, but he had this wonderful picture of how he saw Islam, where there are these concentric rings going to the middle, where there's the little black box of Mecca or whatever, and and as you get progressively further out, it goes from extremist in the middle, which is obviously meant to be pure Islam, to moderate on the outside, and it's just sort of target for a bomb or something. But I mean, the thing was, that was his view of Islam, is that you had to get to the center. And the moderates, they were, not really taking their faith seriously.
Right, which is really the reverse of, even you as an atheist, it's the reverse of the way you would want religion to be. If you accepted that some people are going to be religious one way or another, the average atheist, I don't think, has a problem with the nominal believer of any religion, really. I know some do, but...
Well, I mean, usually anything goes as long as you don't make claims like my religion gives me the right to kill people.
You're a real extremist there.
As long as your religion falls within what's illegal in society, no one cares. I mean, there are some sort of gray areas about, if you're a cult... how much pressure can you put on people to coerce them? Technically, that's within the law, but it's pretty distasteful stuff.
Do you find it exhausting as a scientist and an atheist to have to spend any time talking about religion? I've had many guests on my show who are well-known atheists and thinkers and really bright people who don't believe and yet have to spend a lot of time talking about the behavior of believers because it's impacting their lives. For one, I find it kind of exhausting. I wish we didn't have to discuss it, but unfortunately we do.
I think I've had the conversation so many times now that it doesn't faze me too much. What I find more the problem is distinguishing pose from extremists of one sort or another. Can you really tell the people who are just pretending to be religious fanatics from religious fanatics? And you get the same problem with the social justice things that... can you tell when they're faking it? Or do they really believe that? So I was watching a video earlier about, what was it? Virginity is just a social construct. And
Really?
Really, absolutely. And it's not just one or two. There's a whole bunch of feminists who say it's just a social construct. And what they actually mean by that is it's a behavior of people or something. And at that point, it's, well, yeah. So in other words, when they say social construct, you've got this idea that it's sort of imposed on people. And that's not what they actually mean at all. It's just a name for a behavior. Well, we have a word for that already. It's called, a behavior or an action or something. So a virgin, someone who's not had sex. That's what it means.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure takes a physical action for a virgin to no longer be a virgin.
Yeah. Not quite sure how we got on that. That was my fault. Sorry.
I don't know how we got there, but I see your point. So, so what level would you say atheist are you? Are you you want to eradicate religion altogether? I mean, I get what you say about you don't mind as long as they live within civil society, but obviously you do some videos on this and about atheism. Do you see a way for the secular world in a modern 2016 society to work with religion at this point?
So, for the broad brush picture, I'm very liberal about this. Basically, you can do what you want as long as it doesn't scare the horses. So if people want to, people do all sorts of weird stuff with their time. They do self-destructive things, like drinking, smoking, driving fast cars. people choose what they want to do with their lives. We're very keen on keeping that there. The problem comes is when it's informing people's actions to the level of, like we're discussing earlier, whatever, driving trucks through crowds or shooting crowds or blowing people up or convincing others to do the same. This is, for me, where there is a line. For me, the other one that I care a lot about, most people don't influence the education system that much, but when religion tries to force itself into the educational system, that for me is a big no-no. I mean, teaching kids is hard enough work as it is without actually sort of poisoning their minds with stuff that is known to be wrong. Because in some cases that's irreversible. If a kid's that's what they've learned for their entire youth. Once you get to about 20-ish, your brain's ability to relearn stuff vanishes.
Yeah, what do they say about? Isn't your brain 80% formed by your 2 or something? I mean, the elasticity over time. I think I'm probably butchering. I probably butchered that terribly, but the elasticity of your brain does stop.
Yeah, I mean, your ability to learn languages, for instance, when you're very young, it's very easy. Once you get into the teens, it gets progressively harder. And for most people, trying to learn a language after the age of about 30 is almost impossible. Yeah, you lose that flexibility in your brain over time. And it really does, there's a reason why education sort of stops around 18 is because, it gets progressively harder to sort of get people to learn stuff.
Yeah. So hearing everything you've said about religion, the examples you used about, driving a truck in Paris into people or shooting people, there's a zillion shootings, but we could take Brussels or Paris again or Orlando or whatever it is. Those are examples of Islamic extremism. Would you say all religions are sort of equally as nonsensical, and it just so happens that Islam is acting out more now, or is that not your?
I mean, Sam Harris had this marvelous point that extremism really isn't the problem. In that, you get the Jainist extremists. There's the ones who brush the little bugs out of the way to, for fear of stepping on anything. Who sort of filter their water to avoid drinking bugs.
Right.
The more extremist they are, the less harmful they are. The problem is when your religion is actually convincing you to kill people. Now, Christianity's been through that. It's not sort of unique to Islam, but Islam is currently the religion that, by a long way, is convincing people to kill each other. And that's a problem, and that's. One of my big beefs, if you like, with the spread of Islam is, I mean, you're right. Not all religions are equally bad in this measure.
Right. They all may be equally made up, but that doesn't mean that they're all equally acted on the same. And that's the difference. Not equally
comparable in their ability to get people to break the law, vis-a-vis sort of killing people, that sort of thing.
Let's shift away from religion for just a second and focus on the social justice stuff, which really frames pretty much everything else that we're going to talk about for this hour. When did you realize the problem of social justice? Was it when you became a YouTuber, or had you seen it first in your private life?
So I first rubbed shoulders with it in 2011, which is a ways back now. And it was within the atheist movement, which at the time was enjoying its sort of golden age here, Dawkins, Dennett, Harris, and Hitchens. And there was a real feel of momentum to the movement. And there was this one woman, Rebecca Watson, who, I don't know whether you've heard of Elevator Gate.
No, I don't think so.
And that's when I first sort of came up against this sort of feminism in the atheist movement. And so what it was is one woman had hung out till about 4 o'clock in a bar. So she was a regular speaker on the atheist movement, had a long time of beef about people hitting on her, which is, what happens if you're going to hang out in a bar till 4 a.m. I mean, this is, there is an expected social venue where this sort of thing is going to happen, and 4 o'clock in a bar is that sort of place anyway.
Right. If no one's hitting on you at 4 a.m. in a bar, you have bigger problems.
Yes. All the way at the bottom of the pile. Anyway, so she was going back to her room, and some guy offers, he goes up in the elevator with her and says, would he like to come back to her room for coffee, which is obviously a euphemism for whatever. And she says no. And the next day she writes this blog about how this shows what a problem the atheist movement has with sexism. And at the time, it's like, you've got to be shitting me. 4 o'clock in a bar at a conference, which are usually sort of, mixing places like that. But at the time, I said nothing because, I think this goes even back to the Bible, is, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And, if you're going to fight a civil war, you're going to suffer more casualties than anyone else. U.S. Civil War is still the war that has killed more Americans than any other. Mm-hmm. And so, for the large part, I followed the Reagan ethic, which is, you don't speak ill of your own party, so to speak. Yeah,
that's not how the Republicans operate anymore, by the way.
I know. It's glorious, isn't it? But, anyway, so... the noise just got louder and louder, and I actually talked to some other these people who were feminists, and they were telling me how I had privilege. This really was rubbing me the wrong way at the time, because it's like, you've got to be shitting me, because I started working burger flipping at McDonald's. The idea that, I have privilege. Well, what about the president? Does he have black privilege because he's now the president? I mean, right. Anyway, yeah. So that was really rubbing me the wrong way. And eventually, she had a punch up with Dawkins, where he basically said that her problems were trivial, which they were. Right? If the biggest thing that you've got to worry about in the atheist community is getting hit on after being in the bar up till 4 a.m, you've not got much. You've got a pretty good life, and he basically compared her strifes to women in Islamic countries, which, let's be real, is a hell of a contrast. Anyway, so that's basically what caused a rift in the atheist movement, and much later on, I just took the gloves off, and it's like, well, if we're going to do this, let's make it quick. And that's where I got stuck into the feminists in the atheist community. And then it sort of turned out, actually, this is a pervasive problem. It destroyed Occupy Wall Street. It really did. It sort of took what had a real vibe going to it, a real momentum going to it, and it destroyed it in an astonishing, it's like, I forget whether it was 6 months or a year, it went from something that had potential to something that was a punchline.
Yeah, and not only did it do it there, but I think we're seeing that right this very second with what it's doing to Black Lives Matter, an organization that, in my estimation, had good intentions to start, and now we're seeing it be led by its worst parts. And the example I keep using is that, there's several examples, but one is that they were up in Toronto during Gay Pride, and they stopped the Gay Pride parade because they wanted the gays there to sign a document with their demands. So they said, well, we're more oppressed than you. I don't even know that in Canada they're having a problem with police brutality, but this idea... What's that?
Yeah. Don't tell them there's a black president.
Right. You can't talk. Right. So it does corrupt everything, right? I mean, have you seen a movement that it hasn't corrupted?
No. And you're right. It's a sort of tautology in some ways that, once you make being oppressed a virtue, then it basically becomes a competition to be who can say they're the most oppressed. And when you don't actually have to be black to identify as being black, and I'm sure you saw this black woman who was actually a lily white girl who had just sort of darkened herself up a bit, and she became the black president of, I forget what it was.
I think she was working for the NAACP.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's mind-blowing, right? Like, you know, if you remove yourself from it, it really starts becoming mind-blowing.
But for me, the people who really, I think, bear a lion's share of the blame for this are actually the universities. And that might sound kind of strange, but for years they've basically had feminist studies and African American studies. And what do they have to do with their time? And there are hundreds of departments, certainly I don't know about the African American stuff, but the women's studies thing, there are hundreds of departments in America doing this sort of thing. And they're pumping out these special snowflakes at an astonishing rate. And, you know, this is why I look at some of this stuff online and, you know, like the virginity is a social construct. They didn't make that up. They learned that. And, so in that sense, I think the universities really do have to take their share of blame for this. And now it's an irony that the university lecturers tend to, how shall we say, be kind of soft and the one thing that scares the hell out of them is being called a racist or a sexist.
Yeah.
Right? And this is where I think you really saw them score their first real victory. Well, it wasn't a victory, it was a Pyrrhic victory at Mizzou, where they actually got the scalp of the university president.
Yep.
And it's easy, you know, you just go up and say, well, if there's racism on your campus, we don't have to show any real evidence of it, but you're a racist if you don't deal with it. It's basically emotional blackmail.
Yeah. And isn't it a compounding problem? Because once you start that route and you sort of let the inmates run the asylum, let the students run the asylum, that ultimately the people that you're going to get to be professors and administrators and presidents of these universities are not going to be as qualified as they would have been 10 years ago, because who would ever want to be involved in that mess?
Absolutely. I mean, who would want to take such a ghastly job? Where you saw the one at Yale, about
of course,
the Halloween costumes, and you got this. They talk about privilege, but you know, if you're getting an education at Yale, you've waived the right to call anyone else privileged. It's that simple. And there she is bawling her head off at this poor professor, sort of saying it's not about creating an academic environment, it's about creating a home. And it's like, actually, honey, it's exactly the opposite of that. It's about creating an intellectual environment. And if you just want somewhere where you can feel at home, you know, go to Daddy's Ranch or something. You know?
Right. And yes, she said that, which is the complete reverse of what the truth is. But I don't know if you know this, but that girl that was yelling at the professor, at one point she yelled at him. She said, "Who hired you?" She was on the board of students that hired him.
Yeah, no, it's you couldn't make this stuff up. You really couldn't. And it's so hard to tell if someone is just pretending to be that stupid, because you just can't believe that someone is actually that stupid. and time again, you know, you sort of click several of their videos just to check that they're not faking it.
Right.
And no, they really do believe in this stuff.
They really do believe in it. How much do you think this is just internet culture, that we wake up every morning and the second you scroll your Twitter feed or you look at your YouTube subscriptions, you're ready to see something that offends you and go crazy? Now, I know that that's not the way you behave, but that we've so trained everyone to have an opinion about everything that this is, of course, this is the end result of that.
Well, I mean, there is, you know, the internet is a bloodbath of free speech, and it is an attention economy. So if you like things where the social justice warriors are saying the most stupid things are obviously going to be the ones that get the most attention, because they're so stupid. You know, how can you be a functioning adult and still believe that crap? So So, yeah, I mean, for me, there is so much of it out there that, no, I don't go looking for it anymore. But you're right. I mean, quite often, if you see it like pop up several times in the Twitter feed, it's usually worth a click. And, I don't have the time to make that many videos, but, oh, my word, it's a gold mine out there. There's a gold mine of stupidity. And like I was saying, these people are frequently people who have done degrees in these subjects or courses or something. They didn't just sort of sit down. Well, no one could come out with something that stupid en masse. It's obvious that they've learned this stuff.
Is it doubly maddening to you because you're a scientist? I mean, you need empirical evidence to make a point, right? You hypothesize something and then you need to try to prove it. And what these people are doing is they're putting the hypothesis is more important than the proof. So they just have this idea of what's right, and then if it doesn't matter if they can prove it, they feel it's right. That's more important than fact.
Yeah, feelies before realies, that brigade.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this bit is teeth grinding. That they start with the conclusion, and then they look for the facts to support their conclusion, which is the opposite way around it goes with science. Is you look at the evidence and work towards the conclusions. They start with the conclusions. Black people are oppressed, and then they look for the evidence for it. And it's also, for them, it must be for a certain fraction of the black community, it must be a very seductive narrative that the reason that your life sucks is because you're oppressed. There is always a balance between having a safety net and and forcing people to stand on their own feet. This is, if you like, the American dream is people have almost no safety net. They have to stand on their own feet. Mm-hmm. And if they're being told that it's not their fault, that they're a failure, it's society's fault. In fact, there's a great Simpsons quote about that. Homer, you're a fat bull, a waste of skin. And his reply is, which is society's fault because...
Almost everything I know I learned from seasons 5 to 9 of The Simpsons, I think.
There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of good stuff in there.
Yeah.
But you can see how if you are... it's not your fault your life's shit. It's that society is oppressing you. And... yeah, for people with feminist degrees, you can see why that might resonate with them.
All right, so with all this social justice stuff in mind, I've noticed that you've referenced a lot of what's going on in America right now. Do you think this stuff is taking root everywhere right now? Is it equal, or are you guys watching us right now going, you guys are the last ones that have a chance to fight this freaking thing because we've lost it already? That's what I suspect a little bit from some of my European viewers.
Yeah. So there are two imports that I fear. One comes from the Middle East and one comes from America. And ironically, it's not gun culture, but yeah, it's the way I see it is that America is putting out so many. There are so many women's studies courses. There is a sort of almost critical mass of this stuff out there. And it's not really based on, like you said, it's based on people's feelings. And yeah, that's essentially being certainly imported into England and other countries in Europe. In fact, one of the guys I work with, he would watch some of my videos and sort of wryly scoff. Yeah, America's always a little funny like that. It never happened here. And what do you know? I think it was like 2 weeks later, they had an arts exhibition. He was a bit of an arts fan. Mm-hmm. And the arts exhibition was shut down by feminists. It's like, so like that, I see it as it's creeping doom. And we had things like Tim Hunt, the Nobel laureate, who basically got burned at the stake because a feminist made an accusation. British guy.
Yeah.
And, Dawkins also, the feminists, periodically have a go at him for being a misogynist. It's one of those things that if you go up to a typical academic and just sort of point at them and shout misogynist, a lot of them will concede to almost anything. Yeah, it's a superb. I think this is why it gets so much traction so quickly, is they're just not used to that level of being attacked, especially if it's over something that they don't see is important, and all of a sudden there are all these people threatening to expose them online. Yeah, I can see how that rattles a lot of these people who live a very unantagonistic life.
Yeah. So is part of the problem here that when you take, two people, for example, or we could take any of those four horsemen, but I think Dawkins and Sam Harris would be the best examples. People who have taken other public positions, outside of atheism, talked more about politics, for example, that I think that they stake out positions, and then I don't know that, I've had Sam on the show several times. I don't know that he's ever said to me, I think I'm right about everything. He says, this is what I think about this, and I think he has a pretty malleable mind. But that the flaw of what they've done is that they put out a position that's well thought out, and then they expect that it's going to be treated as such, where the people that are going to attack them, they're just waiting for that one sentence out of context, and then it's go to town, all gloves are off.
So, you'll recall earlier I was saying that, a lot of scientists are terribly naive about how the real world functions. And
right.
that, there are venues when you're expected to wear a suit and tie or you're not taken seriously. Sam Harris I've seen several times, and there is a certain level of naivety that, because they live in a world where people, they do try to understand what you're saying, take it seriously, point out they're not used to this sort of bloodbath where people are out to get you. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really matter whether it's true or not. There's a certain naivety I find to Sam's expectation that the rest of the world is going to be like the discussions he gets at university. Of course, these people are pimping Islam and the such like. They're going to, they've got an agenda to push. Yeah, they're not going to. They've got no constraints on being fair.
Yeah. So what do you make of those people? So now, I'm not talking about the average social justice warrior or whatever who thinks that they are doing something good. The average college kid who, even if we ultimately disagree with their methods, but they think they're doing something good. I think it's pretty obvious that in the public space, there are plenty of people who we know are acting maliciously, who don't mind lying and smearing. And even when evidence is brought to bear, they ignore it or deny it and all of that stuff. How do you wrap yourself around that as a public person in this space?
So, I've taken my share of slings and arrows in the bloodbath out there. And I don't know whether you know this one. I've actually a semi-regular occurrence now. People write to my employer.
I want to talk about that, yeah.
This one in particular stood out because, she was accusing me of supporting Hitler and supporting the genocide, and how I was anti-feminist, which was Nazi ideology, and anti-Islam, which was Nazi ideology. And it was just, it was that crazy, but that was sent to my employer. And I've lost my train of thought at that point.
Well, I think that dealing with people with bad intentions, there's sort of no end there, right?
Right. Yeah, but this is the thing. The way I see it is, as long as it's kept on the open market, on the level playing field of free speech, with some exceptions where you get into the slander and libels stuff. If people are going to say things that are false about you, if it's egregiously false, you can make a devil's sermon about what they've done far better than you can make a good case for that on the open marketplace of ideas. When people start writing to your employer and the such like, that this is taking it to a different level,
Yeah.
But I mean, that for me, I don't care. As long as if they're going to say nasty stuff about me, that for me I don't really care about. If they're going to say things that are false, if I really care about them, I can rebut them. You know, so as long as if you want to get out there into the bloodbath, you got to be able to take a punch on the chin, basically.
Yeah. So basically, you got to pick your spots. Otherwise, your whole channel and your whole life would be dedicated to just playing defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where it all comes down to, I can only make so many videos. I've got to choose my targets. And you're right. I mean, a lot of the time, if I made videos defending myself against all comers, not only does then that become the sport, right? Any idiot can just come along and do that sort of thing, and you've got to reply to it. It takes time away from the things that I'm actually trying to really achieve, you know, counteracting some of the bullshit pseudoscience out there.
Yeah. All right. So let's shift topics altogether and talk a little bit about Brexit, because I did not do a ton about it on the show. We did a little bit. And the reason for that was I said, look, I'm not an expert in this. I don't have a problem admitting when I'm not an expert in something. Somehow, apparently that's really innovative. I didn't realize that it wasn't. But I said that from everything that I read, my feelings were that if I lived there, that I probably would have been for it, because I believe that you should have as much local control in your life as possible, and I wouldn't want my decisions about my life being exported to people in Brussels or hundreds or thousands of miles away. That was sort of my short take on it, but you've talked a lot about it, so I thought maybe you could enlighten us a little bit.
So Brexit is one of those things where there are certainly arguments for it. You know, all these things about Brussels being bureaucratic and inefficient and all that sort of thing, they're all true. There are also arguments against virtually any form of government. More stingingly, some of the things that they do are really annoyingly stupid. So now on all the kids' toys, you have to have screws to hold in the batteries.
So that's like something that they said all of Europe's going to have to do this because one kid choked on a battery and something.
No, I don't even think anyone choked on a battery, right? Because the obvious Europe used to have, 20 countries, each of which had different trading laws. And the whole thing, as you can imagine, is gargantuanly ineffective to sort of trade between all these countries. So if you're actually going to have one set of rules for everyone, there is an obvious economy there, right? That now anyone can trade with anyone else fairly transparently. And so as long as you don't get 20 times more ineffective with that one set of rules, it'll be, on the big picture, a win. Right? Because you're not wasting as much time with the bureaucracy of trading. The problem is that, of course, you get all these people say, what rules are we going to have? And you got all these people, and all they basically do is make up rules. Right. And so they make up some pretty stupid rules. But essentially, that's the majority of what Europe is now. I mean, the majority of it used to be something called the Common Agricultural Policy, which was born out of the best of intentions and was rivaled only by how the scale of its failure. In that I think it got something like 60% of the European budget was going on this common agricultural policy. So it's born out of the end of World War II. They decided that, if Europe's going to do anything, it's going to secure the food supply. You don't really want the food supply to be completely at the whims of free trade in the, when your farmer's going out of business in the bad years, or, because then in the good years, you might not have enough farmers to make enough food. That was the general idea, and there is some sense to that you want the stability in the food supply. Problem is, of course, that farming techniques got a lot more effective and all that sort of thing, and the idea of running out of food became. They had it at the end of World War II, which was why that was an issue. So that evaporated very quickly, and now you've got all of these subsidized farmers, and they were just producing loads of food. And there was nothing they could do with it, so they had all these great big, wheat mountains and butter lakes and wine, whatever.
The wine one sounds kind of good.
The wine lake. But then comes the question, well, it's shameful just to have it. We'll just dump it on the market, which, of course, now undercuts farmers everywhere else in the world. So it was a gargantuan waste of money and all that sort of thing. But that they've cut that way back now. And so what Europe mostly is this trade agreement. And there's the European Court of Human Rights and some other bits tied onto it. They are mostly toothless, like the United Nations, in that no one really wanted to give up any sovereignty to these bodies. So they basically they don't really have much in the way of power. There's no real enforcement mechanism for any of this. Then they had the euro, which was also union of the currency before you have union of the fiscal policy. You don't have to be Einstein to work out that that's probably not going to end very well. And that's an ongoing problem. So, I mean, there are myriad criticisms of Europe. But for England, the thing is that if at the moment anyone in the world wants to trade with England, it's easy. They just use the same rules as you do with anyone else in Europe, right? Now you're going to basically have to rewrite all of those, and everyone who trades with England's going to have to work out what the hell they are. Yeah. And in practice, it's probably not going to change that much. Right? Yeah. What are the costs? What are the benefits? It's probably on the big picture not going to change a lot in England one way or the other. But the change from one system to the other is a gargantuan pain in the ass for everyone who trades with England. And for what? I mean, it's a distinction without a difference.
Right. So you're going all from the economic side so far, from what I gathered. What I sense that a huge amount of it had to do with the immigration situation, which I tend to think maybe you were a little more sympathetic to the Brexiteers on that, right?
Well, yes and no. So for the Brexiteers, absolutely not, because England, right? There's two basic regions in Europe. There's Schengen and non-Schengen. UK is non-Schengen. So if you actually come from Europe to England, you have to show your passport. So if you're a legitimate citizen of Europe, you get free movement over Europe. Right. But England still have its own border controls. So for that, there would be no change. If you're talking about the influx of refugees from the Middle East, this is a very big problem. And countries like Germany have really kind of screwed the pooch on that. Again, the argument is primarily economical, in that if you just assume there are cultural problems, as we've seen. But the economic argument is Germany's a country of about 90 million people or something. They're getting 1 to 2 million extra people in there. The young ones generally aren't a problem because young people adapt to the culture. The people a little older, they're not going to be able to learn the language, they're not going to blend into the culture, and they're probably not bringing much in the way of marketable skills. It's a 2% burden on your country for the next generation. And if you just do those sort of back of an envelope calculations, it's crippling. You're talking, trillions of dollars, that sort of thing. But again, one of the real problems was there was no real, no one's really given any power to Europe, so it's got no enforcement mechanisms. What can you do with all these refugees? Yeah.
Was there a real debate about it? Because I think that's one of the problems we're having here is we're not debating the real things because you either are for immigration or you're a racist. So we don't have a real debate. So I would imagine in Germany, and for all the economic reasons you're talking about, you could make a strong argument against immigration on purely economic grounds. And I'm sure you could make an argument for immigration on economic grounds too. But was that conversation even being had, or was it just let them in or you're racist?
In Germany, they've got for the large part was if you didn't let the immigrants in, they got how should we say, a tainted history with this sort of thing.
Right.
So there's probably a lot of overcompensation going on there. But that was basically the overwhelming attitude in Germany. Recently, they've had all these attacks on trains with just people stabbing people and that sort of thing. Again, if you're looking in terms of macroscopic costs, this is nothing compared to the costs of trying to support 2 million people for a generation. But that's the sort of thing that the knife attacks, I think, are the things that are starting to change opinions in Europe. Ironically, now that it's actually manifesting itself as a problem, people are starting to take it more seriously.
Yeah. All right, so I want to wrap up with you on just free speech in a broad sense, because I think from all the YouTube people that I've talked to this week, and pretty much from almost every guest that I've had on, almost everything these days for the online world is couched in free speech. And in just a couple of weeks, it sounds like the UN might take control of the internet. Have you been paying attention to this thing at all?
I've missed that. I've been kind of out of town for the past couple of weeks.
Right, so you were on vacation. Sounds like the United States is giving up control of the internet. I haven't even paid as much attention as I should to it. Maybe I'll do something on it before it's too late. But that there's just so much related to free speech that that the mainstream media has just failed us in all of our countries, and that we're fighting for free speech and free thought online, and even that now is becoming a precarious thing. Milo getting booted from Twitter. We know about Facebook banning all kinds of ex-Muslims and other people that are genuinely the good guys. Were you banned? Were you banned from Facebook?
No, I've been banned from both.
Oh, you were banned from Twitter, right?
If I've done the triumph for it, I've been banned from YouTube as well.
Wow, you've done the trifecta?
Yeah, I've been banned on everything.
Wait, so break down each one. What was the Twitter one? I think was first, right?
The YouTube was first. That was a long time ago. In fact, that's why my bunny is glowing. My little bunny icon is because after 3 days I came back from the ban.
All right. So what were you banned for on YouTube?
I can't remember. I think it was DMCA stuff. People basically using the DMCA as a weapon, which they've done on and off for, the last 10 years. And I think that's what took it down. It might have been a flagging. I can't actually remember. It's a long time ago now, but I was banned from YouTube, came back. Facebook, I think that was to do with Islam. And the Twitter was certainly to do with feminism.
So you've covered, that's a good range to be banned from 3 different things for 3 different reasons. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
And you're still standing.
Yeah.
Or sitting, as it were.
Yeah, I'm surprised in many ways that I've lasted this long, because this is my fear. I mean, exactly what you were saying is YouTube is almost the last bastion that allows a robust exchange, a robust defense of what we would recognize as free speech. That basically you're allowed to say whatever you want as long as it's, not involving, not bullying kids or something. Kids are in a different category, so they're juniors, not threatening violence, and so keeping down on the splatter damage. Saying bad things about you is fine. Don't say bad things about your dad or something like that. Right? There are. So as long as you're sort of obeying some pretty liberal rules, as far as I'm concerned, free game is where it should be. YouTube's been very good with that. I suspect it's mostly because that's the successful business model, in that the bigger the market, the bigger the bloodbath is, the more views in an intention economy. That means that YouTube pulls in the most money.
So that really is the best argument you could possibly make for free markets, right?
Yes, but it's also worrying in that because you must realize this as well, that all it takes is a few keystrokes from someone at YouTube and we're all gone.
Yeah.
All the work that we put into this, all the videos that we've made, boom, just gone. They can be vanished like that. That I find worrying. The reassuring thing is YouTube doesn't seem to be going in that route. Twitter certainly does, and Facebook does as well. And another financial reason for the hands-off approach to free speech is the more complicated the set of rules you have, the more people you need to enforce them. And once it becomes clear that if you don't like someone, you flag them enough and you can get rid of them, then you basically you open the floodgates to the flagging war.
Yeah, and that's what...
Yeah, they've had those several times on YouTube, and I think they're sort of they've got really pretty robust, very liberal boundaries on what they call free speech on YouTube, which I think is fantastic. But you don't get that on Twitter, you don't get that on Facebook. And it seems to be much more at the whim of the ideology of the owner than, Google doesn't really have an ideology. And that maybe goes back to the origin of Google, which is we don't create media. We just tell people how to locate it, and then we put adverts on it, right? So they didn't care what the actual content was. They were selling the metadata, telling you how to find stuff. And, maybe that's also what they're sort of pursuing with YouTube is they're not the policeman of the content. Within certain really very broad limits.
Right, short of like true vile calls to violence or something of that nature. I guess that's the way that we would want it to be, which is they give us a service, they take a chunk of the ad revenue. Most people know that we're not rolling in dough because of YouTube ads, but they're giving us the service and allowing people to find us. But I think you do make an interesting point about the way people are being censored, which a lot of times, again, it is the inmates running the asylum, because I've talked to people at Facebook where they say it's not our algorithm and it's not us that are doing it. It's there's a mob of people clicking whatever it is, downvote or censor or offended or whatever the button is. I don't know what the button is anymore. But there's an army of people doing it, and then that triggers the system. And then usually these people come back. But that's kind of scary too, whether it's coming directly from Facebook or it's just the mob, because the mob is always probably going to be bigger than the free thinkers.
But this is where things like, 4chan and the such like, they can be great equalizers on this. If it becomes clear that people can just simply abuse mechanisms like this, a lot of these people who are out in the streets sort of saying we need these tools to keep us safe, they will be number 2 on the chopping block, right? If it becomes that easy to get people waxed, they will be gone within a week of the people they want to get rid of. Because, what was it? Because the internet's got a sense of karma like that.
I guess that's the saving grace here, I suppose. Well, Phil, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm glad we did this after, probably should have done it about 2 years ago, but better late than never. So I want to thank Phil Mason, a.k.a. Thunderfoot, for joining me on the Rubin Report for YouTube Week. And you guys can check out his channel at youtube.com/Thunderfoot. Those last 2 O's are zeros. And there is a link right down below. Thanks again, Phil.